All right, let's introduce this evening's presenter. Linda Gregonis has a master's degree from the University of Arizona and is an independent researcher. She has spent more than 40 years researching various aspects of Hohokam culture while working primarily as a ceramics analyst for various cultural resource management companies in Tucson and Phoenix. She's published extensively in CRM literature as well as other venues. She's interested in public education in archaeology and has taught for Elder Hostel Rhodes Scholar Program and the archaeology program at the Cooper Environmental Center. She's also been the editor of Kiva and has prepared numerous indexes for archaeology, history, and environmental science books published by university presses. She's currently the editor of the University of Arizona Anthropological Papers. I've been familiar with Linda's work for quite some time, as I live in the old Fort Lowell neighborhood, where way before I or the fort was here, Hohokam people lived in this area. Linda was instrumental in studying the hardy site that existed in this part of Tucson. And this evening, Linda is presenting from right here in my home in that Fort Lowell area that was once part of the Hohokam community. So now I'm going to turn it over to Linda, who is in my office right next door. Linda?
One of the things that is important to understand when we're looking at things as archaeologists is that when we define an archaeological culture, archaeologists are defining it really on the basis of how people used certain symbols and how they put it on their art and kind of what they did with it, and we're trying to gather some meaning out of that as well. But it is one of the hallmarks of looking at Hohokam art is that it looks different from Membrace, for example, here, or the example that's shown on the right of the screen there is from the site of a mappa down in Nayarit, which is Aztatlan, or place of the white egrets. And that particular area of West Mexico is an area that we think was maybe not instrumental in, but was very important in bringing some ideas in the iconography into the Hohokam region. So the Hohokam as a construct is an archaeological construct. We don't know what the people called themselves, although we do have some ideas from linguistic information that they probably were Uto-Aztecan speakers, as a lot of the people are on the West Coast, and as in historically and pre-Columbian times, and as the O'odham are in historic and modern times. They have Hohokam starts being recognized as an individual culture when people started decorating pottery. And some of the earliest decorations on pottery are these pieces that I'm showing here: Sweetwater red on gray and Snaketown red on buff. The use of incising is something that I think is, I hate to use the word unique because somebody's always going to come up with something new and say no, it's not unique. But in in the northern part of the greater Southwest, or in the US Southwest, incising at this early period in the 600s or so is unique. You don't see it anywhere else. And this incising on the outsides of the pottery is often done. You can see these hatchet lines here on the Sweetwater red on gray, and also around the bottoms of vessels. This is a flare rim bowl. And then they also use this hatchering in triangle form. That goes through the entire Hohokam period, and it's found on a lot of different media. This is a palette from a site over on the San Pedro, and this particular one, this is a really common edge design for these palettes that are made out of schist and other similar tabular material. And you can also see it's got a spiral thing going there, spiral thing going there, and then this hatcher. And the hatchered into triangles is a really important, and the triangles carrying through time is a real important motif for the Hohokam. The front part of that pot that I showed on the right looks like this. This is Snaketown red on buff. And you can see, if you look at this pot long enough, it looks like an optical illusion a little bit. You can kind of see movement in it and motion in it with all this hatchering. And a lot of the Snaketown pottery Snaketown red on buff pottery has that ability, I guess you could say. The crossed, the quartering also relates to something that's known in throughout Mesoamerica, and it's sort of a Pan-American idea of the axis mundi, or the world tree, the world center. So it's the connection between the sky, the earth, and where the compass directions meet. In some cultures, there's more than four. You know, you have four places, and then you have up and down as well, and it's possible that the Hohokam did that as well. But they did quartering in their pottery for quite a long time, in their designs. Another thing that is a really important aspect of Hohokam pottery, especially through time, but also other materials, is that they were into shiny, shimmery materials. The vessel that's on the left that I'm holding in my hand, so you can kind of get an idea of the size of it, has mica. This one particular one, I think, has mica in it rather than schist in it, and it's polished so to bring that mica to the surface, and then it's polished with these parallel lines going up and down, and it really reflects the sunlight, or reflects light really well. The other materials that they used a lot of, and especially in the Gila Valley and the Salt River Valley, are schist, and they also used shiny nacreous shell like abalone. And there's actually local mussel anodonta that grows in the would have grown in the canals in this area, that has nacreous shell. So that shiny and shimmering is important. And we just recently learned that the term in Aadam for shiny and shimmering means a term like reflecting the sun. So it could be that that's what they were trying to do, is reflect sunlight. But I also think that what they were trying to do is maybe incorporate the idea of water shimmering on a surface, shining in the sun, and putting that schist, especially in pottery. They could have tried to incorporate water in their pots and so on. And the reason I say that is because you have this nice shiny shimmery stuff that has the mica on the surface of the pot, but there are also a lot of vessels that you see in this area, in the Tucson Basin, and also in Phoenix, and on the Gila River, and also over in the San Pedro, that incorporate schist in the body, in the temper of the clay. And it's said, they said that, you know, some people studying it think that technologically it helps to create a better pot. But I've also seen it in places like over on the San Pedro. They're using a kind of schist that has, it's really clunky would be a good word for it. It's hard to get it into really fine particles to grind it up properly. So they're throwing it into the clay. It actually kind of defeats the purpose of having a good technology, but because it makes the surface kind of lumpy, and is not really great for the body of the vessel. But it was important for them to include this schist like material. It's called phyllite over there, in that material. So I think that shining and shimmering is a real important aspect. This is another thing that shows up throughout West Mexico and in Mesoamerican art, and our Mesoamerican culture. And it has been picked up by archaeologists. Kelly Hayes Gilpin is the most renowned for starting it in something called Flower World, and that shining and shimmering is an important part of that. We don't know if the Hohokam actually were into, they weren't into Flower World the same way that the ancestral Puebloans were, but we think that they had some of these aspects that carry all the way through Mesoamerica in their art. Another thing that they were really into was spirals, and not just any spiral. You have to have an interlocking spiral on your material. The one on the upper left is from Snaketown Red on Buff pottery, so they're starting it quite early. The one in the center is one that dates to about 800 AD or so, 7 or 800 AD. The one on the lower left is around 900 AD, and then the one on the lower right dates to the 1200s and 12 to 1400s. So you can see that they're keeping that idea of the interlocking spiral. Interlocking spirals with these squiggly lines are also important for in their artwork as well. And you can see this is a pot that I'm not really sure where this pot is from, but you can see that it's incorporating all these lines. And this particular pot dates probably to the 1000s sometime, maybe late 900s, early 1000s. Another thing that the Hohokam did in their artwork that I think has some significance, although I don't think we've actually figured out what that significance is they use negative and positive images. So negative, where they're actually drawing on a vessel around this. It kind of looks like they're making rock art on a vessel. So they're making these images where the wider outline is where the animal is, and this is really tough to draw. I don't know if you've ever tried to draw one of these, and these are earlier than the positive images, as you can see over here. Um, the other thing that they like to do is multiples of animals in the 7 to 900s. That was something that was really important to them. And these multiples of snakes are an important symbol. Snakes are significant for water throughout Mesoamerica and also in the U.S. Southwest. And there is it's not storytelling time right now, but there is a story that alludes to the importance of these snakes in terms of making sure that the waters don't flood, keeping things where they're supposed to be. Uh, this might translate, this kind of snake thing might translate in terms of geometric terms into something that looks like this. We call this a line and stagger design. In West Mexico, one of the archaeologists who has worked down there, her name is Beatrice Braniff, has speculated that this particular symbol is something that's related to another symbol that you see in Mesoamerica, and it has to do with thunder and rain. So it could have to do with thunder and rain, or maybe rain and rivers, something along that line. It's hard to say, but it's an important symbol. Again, carries through the culture, carries through the entire area. And when I say the Hohokam area, as we define it, it's actually fairly large, and the symbols are similar throughout the whole area. So you go all the way from an area southeast of Tombstone all the way over to Gila Bend on the west, from the south, from the border, right about Nogales, and then up into the Tonto Basin in the Verde River Valley. So it's a very broad area to have the same symbols carrying all the way through. Another thing that I think is really important for Hohokam uh, culture in terms of their artwork is they do transforming and shape shifting kind of in their art. This is a little vessel that is from the San Pedro Valley. It's in the Amarin collection, and if you notice this little lizard here, around the bowl, it starts transforming into other kinds of lizards. And it comes out at the end to something that looks like this. And this has been interpreted by some archaeologists as something called lizard man, so it's transforming from a lizard to a human being, perhaps, on this pot. And it's just four or five little um, symbols, and as you turn it around, it does this transformation. But there are a lot of vessels that have seem to have that, again, movement and shape shifting aspect to them. Another thing that's very important, I think, in all of the cultures of West Mexico and into the Southwest. It's the idea of duality. You've heard about hero twins, and I think the Hohokam had an aspect of that shows up in their artwork as well. This is a little figurine that comes from Oracle. And you can see that it's that these are the two different faces of it, and they are a little bit different, and but they are definitely together. We've called it I think in the catalog it's called the Janus figurine, but that was found in Oracle. Another aspect that's very common in Mesoamerica and throughout, actually, again, US Southwest, the Adam as well, is you have a tiered universe where you have the lower world that consists of living beings that are spend their time in the ground or on the ground, like snakes, like horned lizards, animals like that. You would have probably fish would fit into that, scorpions, and so on, things that spend most of their time on the ground. Then you have the middle world, which is really mostly mammals, including people. And then the upper world, you have birds and bats, butterflies, things like that. So the caterpillar, if you're thinking about a butterfly, a caterpillar starts out in the lower world and goes to the upper world. And then plants themselves, they go through all three worlds. And again, this is we've been thinking, Vic and I have been thinking about the saguaro as the axis mundi for the Hohokam, as the world tree for it, because it is, in Adam, it's considered as a living being. It's a person. So we don't see why the Hohokam wouldn't have had felt like that as well, because their boundaries are really where you can see saguaros in most instances. So they start life in the lower world, live into the middle world, and then reach into the upper world. The same can be said of a corn plant. Starts in the lower world, moves to the middle world, and then to the upper world. So those are plants are very important that way. Another thing that this comment came to me from an individual that I just happened to pass by at a conference, who stopped me and said, if you have an object, it asks to be made. And this was from Ihachad Adam fellow. Uh, and that made me really think about how we approach, as archaeologists, how we approach the objects that we analyze. I know with sherds, I'm just sorting through them, and like today, I sorted about 3,000 sherds. So you don't have time to really contemplate that idea. But if you look at objects as living forces that can act on the world, they have personhood, they have their own lives, they have um, power, basically. And if they're made, asked to be made, like was this sheep asked to be made? It's a set. It's got a little cup in the top, so it's a stone bowl. It was asked to be made. It's made out of a really hard material that is the same kind of material that people use to make axes out of it. And it had a purpose. And you can see that they took a lot of time with the details on this. And then when it had its purpose, when its purpose was done, they broke it. And what they did, they couldn't break the body of the pot because, or the vessel, because it's very, very tough. But what they did was spend a lot of time hammering off one of the horns on this animal. So when they whoever made it was done with it, then they put it away and you know discard. I don't think I'm getting away, trying to get away from the word discard, because I'm not sure that a lot of things were discarded by the Hohokam. I think they were put away, uh, not disposed of, but put in an area where they wouldn't harm anybody else. Um, Another really common symbol in the Hohokam is the flying bird motif, and this one I think is unique to the Hohokam. You see it occasionally in Salado pottery, but if you think about Salado as being sort of a syncretic group of Mogollon, uh, ancestral Pueblo and Hohokam, and maybe some Casas Grandes folks thrown in there. That's, I think, where that motif shows up. But this thing that's been defined as a flying bird motif, you can see it starts off in sort of a negative design earlier on, and then goes to the positive design. And it's called the flying bird motif because when Emil Howry was excavating at Snaketown, he was seeing flocks of birds. In his case, it was lark buntings. These are red-winged blackbirds. But he was seeing flocks of birds and thought that um, to him looked similar to what you see in these multiple images of birds or whatever it is they're drawing. I started thinking that may not be the case for the Hohokam when I was doing open houses at the State Museum, and we would Mike Jacobs would often give me a little pot that had a whole bunch of flying bird motifs on it to show people, and I asked people what they thought that symbol meant, and not one of them said a flying bird. They had other ideas, butterflies and so on. So I think it's one of those cases where the motif itself could have many meanings depending on how it was made, when it was made, and so on. Vic and I think that it might have to do with saguaro and bird transformation. again. So you have your doves, the white-winged doves that some people think are the scourge right now because they're all over your bird feeders because of the saguaros. They come in to this area in April or so, and they'll stay through the end of August. And they are real important pollinators for the saguaro. I think the Adam certainly recognized that, and I don't know why the Hohokam wouldn't have recognized that as well. So we think that maybe what they were showing when they're showing these is that it's a transformation between a dove and a saguaro. Now, we were at a conference in Ajo in March, and an Adam gentleman suggested that this particular motif looked to him like a story about saguaros that were destroyed. You see these parallel lines here? That to them means rain, and it could be saguaros that were destroyed in a flood. So again, lots of possibilities for meanings, but they definitely had meanings beyond just one single artist, because you have an artist in um, Tucson making this design at the same time an artist in Northern Phoenix is making this design on a pot. So it's a very important design. Another, this is I think, an archaeological construct. When people really started looking at Hohokam archaeology, they did start noticing some parallels in the designs with West Mexico. And they, I think, emphasized it by bringing in this critter, which is the Cipacli or earth monster, which is a really common motif. Cipacli is the Aztec term for it, so it wouldn't have been called Cipacli by the Hohokam, no matter what it was. But it's a term for an animal that's part alligator or caiman, part jaguar, part something else that lives in the southern part of or central and southern part of Mexico, and you know, we were trying to see if things like this, archaeologists were labeling this as a Cipacli back in the 1960s and 70s because they thought it sort of resembled that figure. I don't think that's what these are. I think that these, you see them in pottery, you see them in shell. I don't think we've ever seen one in rock art, although they may exist that way. But what I think they are canids that we have, our wild canids, our foxes, coyote, kid fox, or gray fox. And those are animals that, of course, in Adam creation myths and so on, coyote is one of the main creators. And these guys are very important in Adam stories. I don't see why they wouldn't have been in Hohokam stories as well, because they were certainly encountering coyotes on a daily basis. So there's another version of that critter that Beatrice Braniff, down in working in Nayarit and Sinaloa, noticed on pottery that she was working on, and this is what it looks like. So this would be the caiman part of it, and then they do this sort of splayed head with these things coming out of the top, which could be things that are called breath volutes in Mesoamerica. So it means that the thing is speaking to you, but it's definitely an overhead view of some weird little creature. And what I think, you also see them, this is at Painted Rocks Reservoir. So we see something similar to that in Hohokam art from time to time. And this is from a vessel that's from the Gila Bend area. And you can see these little breath volutes or whatever they are coming out of there. And what I think happened is, as it could have been actually in West Mexico as well, but as this idea for whatever this thing is, Earth Monster or whatever we want to call it, worked its way north into this area, I think what they were looking at were, you know, they transferred the idea of horned lizards into that Earth Monster or other being, important being. And this idea actually is one that may have come up as the horned lizard, actually from West Mexico or even Central Mexico. Some recent research that some people have been doing in that area have suggested that the some of the things that are called cipacles on codexes actually represent horned lizards. Uh, and the reason that they're important is that in a lot of areas, these come out at the same time that you're planting your corn for the summer. In this area, the same thing is the case. So they're very important indicators of rain. They're part of that fertility cycle for corn and other summer crops. And the Hohokam loved horned lizards. This is a little guy from the San Pedro Valley. This one is from, I think this one is from Phoenix. This is one that was found down near uh, the West Branch site in Tucson. This is a plate. And then this little guy is from a site in Central Phoenix. One of the things that's interesting to me about this particular little being that is probably a horned lizard is that you can see these kind of horns coming off the edge of it. And this was pointed out to me by Wade Sherbrook, who's he's probably the world's leading expert on horned lizards. Um, he noted that the only horned lizard that has these little projections on the sides of their heads lives down in Nayarit and Sinaloa. So it would be interesting to do some sourcing on this and see where it actually came from. Because if that came up from Nayarit or Sinaloa, I think we have a really strong connection there. But horned lizards are important animals, not just because they come out when it rains, but you know, what other animals can shoot blood out of their eyes? And that's one of the things they do. They can also capture rain. They capture water that falls on their heads. They're really important in a lot of different southwestern cultures. I learned from a Navajo woman that they call these grandfathers in Navajo. And if you want a little bit of rain, you pour some water on the head of the lizard, but you have to be careful because if you pour too much on there, you can cause a flood. One of the things that Wade Sherbrook pointed out is that we have uh, several different kinds of horned lizards living where the Hohokam lived. And we have the shorthorn lizard, which is a higher elevation animal. You'd see it up in the Tonto Basin. You see it, like, for instance, up on Mount Lemmon. And then we have in our area, we have the regal horned lizard. So the shorthorn lizard has this notch on the back of their head, have a really heavy kind of brow ridge thing going on here. And the regal horned lizard has these horns going all the way around the back of their head. Well, Wade did research in all the museums to get as many pictures of horned lizards as he could find, and he discovered that the Hohokam indeed were looking at these two different kinds of horned lizards. So this would represent a shorthorn lizard. This would represent the regal horned lizard. So was the maker of this particular vessel somebody who lived in the Tonto Basin and traded it down into this area, whereas this person lived down in like the Gila Valley or someplace like that? Again, we don't really know. The other characteristics that I don't know if the Hohokam would have noticed this is that the shorthorn lizards give live birth, the regal horned lizards lay eggs. And that would certainly be a difference in their behavior that they may have noticed. Another thing that's a really popular image in Hohokam art are these birds with outspread wings and then feet that it looks kind of like they're landing or taking off. So you have like this egret that's taking off, and they have that same sort of configuration to their wings and so on. But they also have a lot of them have this mask-like aspect to them where it kind of looks like it might be a human dancer in a mask. And that's a possibility as well. One of the fun things about a lot of these is that if you look, they're on flare rim bowls, so they're on bowls that have a shape that goes out like this. And they are often facing, if you're looking at the pot, they're kind of facing head down into the pot. So could they be part of or related to a ritual that is common in West Mexico? It's common in southern Mexico as well. That's called where you have voladores, who are men who get up on a really tall pole and then tie themselves to that and then spin down upside down and representing birds in flight. And it's a fertility rain ritual. So it could relate to something like that, something like a dance, or if you carry it into historic Adam, ritual into the skipping dance that uses egrets and other birds on the tops of heads of the dancers. Dancing was a really big thing for the Hohokam as well. And when you start seeing it on pottery about the same time you start seeing all of the animals on there. So 700 to around 1000 AD is the prime time when they were doing this sort of thing. But you see the dancers everywhere, and they can have they'll be facing different directions sometimes. Um, they're also carrying instruments like these gourd rattles that you can see here. The bracelet on this guy could be a series of bracelets that you can use as sort of a rattle. Uh, Vic and I have been calling these guys rake dancers because it looks like they're carrying rakes. But I think what these are either wing feathers of or just the feathers themselves of something like a vulture or an egret. That if you shake them back and forth, it would make a really nice kind of shushing sound. And then, of course, we also have flute players that are important in Hohokam art. And you see these on rock art. We have dancers on rock art. This is at Picture Rocks on the north end of Tucson. Um, and you see them in rock art a lot in these kinds of lines of dancing. One of the things that I think is interesting about Picture Rocks is that this spiral was put in on top of whatever this original scene, complete scene was. And this shows lines of dots and a line going through this during equinoxes. And I'm wondering if something happened, such as an earthquake or something like that, that realigned the rocks so that whatever these dancers were doing, uh, it changed how you saw it. So they decided to put a spiral in on top, and then all of these little animals as well. Um, this is also at that site. This is just above that in the panel. And you could also see a lot of people doing different things with staffs here or holding things in there's a staff guy with a staff here doing things. Are they interacting with, like this guy looks like he's shoving this sheep bighorn, but they're interacting with the wildlife in the area in different ways. The staffs themselves are probably an important symbol of some sort of status or some sort of, it's an indicator of this is a being of a certain status or possibly just an old person, something along those lines. But these also show up a lot in rock art. This is from Tumamoc Hill. This is from the South Mountains. These are all from picture rocks. This particular guy, which is made on an abalone shell, is found in was found in a site south of Tucson, and you can see that head of that cane is actually a bird, probably a raptor of some kind. We think Joe Howell, who did the analysis on this, thinks that this little guy represents one of the old gods, old Mesoamerican gods. So there again, it's a Mesoamerican connection with symbology like this particular symbol. And again, possible and maybe probable. It's hard to directly connect the mythologies and the stories back and forward in time, but I think you can make a case that that might be what's going on here. Another really popular symbol that you see in rock art and you see in pottery as well is our burden carriers. And this is a real typical burden carrier with the tump line across the head, the basket that they're carrying, the staff that he's got, and this one is walking around the whole bowl. If you go to probably any museum in Mexico and look at their pre-Columbian material, you will see an image of a burden carrier somewhere in that. This is the image on the that I just pulled up here is from a codex, and you can see it's the same sort of image. Now, these guys have a straight staff, but they're holding onto that tump line and they're carrying a burden with them, and it is very similar to what Akima Adam and Tana Adam used to use back in the at the turn of the 20th century and before. So it's a long term, long use object of a basket or a bag, and using that tump line and holding onto the tump line with your hand and then carrying a staff with you. So it's a really important indicator of travel and movement that way. Trade, she's going to be trading something there. They're carrying, I think this one, and they're carrying cotton in tribute somewhere. Uh, but it is an indicator of travel and transportation. And I think that's one of the things that the Hohokam were really good at, was traveling. So where were they traveling to? One of the areas that I'm pretty sure that we've decided, archaeologists have decided that these guys were going down to the Gulf of California to get shell and also to get salt. This is a place called the Salina Grande that I had the opportunity to visit last year. It's north of Rocky Point, and it is a salt flat where you have these things called pozos, which are springs. They're freshwater springs that come up through the salt. This is It's not right on the shore of the ocean. It's in a little embayment there, and it doesn't have a direct connection with the ocean right now, but probably did 200, 300 years ago. And the shoreline has risen in that area because of earthquakes and things. But it has these pozos that bring up fresh water. It interacts with the salts in there, and it lays out these salt beds. If you ever get a chance to go see it, you should. This is where the Adam today, the Tana Adam and the Akimil Adam, one of the places where they do their salt pilgrimage too. So, in addition to going down for what we always think of as a shell, they were going down probably for salt as well. And salt wouldn't really show up in the archaeological record, I don't think. All around this Salina Grande, on every little dune site and near the Pozo, probably not right on the Pozos, but near the Pozos, in any little sand dune where they could build a little fire and cook things. They are cooking shell, having in this case it's a snail bake rather than a clam bake. But they were definitely using the resources on the Gulf and pulling in and having some good feasts. And whether it was the Hohokam or people that were in that area that were interacting with the Hohokam is not very clear. We know from research that they were interacting with the Trincheras folks there. You find Trincheras pottery in small amounts. You find Hohokam pottery, and you also find a kind of a local plainware that some people have made the case for the idea that the people that were living, like from Rocky Point up into the Sierra Pinacate in northwestern Sonora, were the people that they're calling them Areneños now, but that maybe they were those people from time immemorial, and the Hohokam just came down and traded with them. But I think you can make the case that the Hohokam were pretty good travelers. There's a little piece of a shell uh, man or shell image that there was a cache of these found in a site near Gila Bend, and this little image, this little shell man image, we're pretty sure the whole cache looks like it was made by one artisan out of spondylus shell, and the shell itself, the little figure of the man, has also showed up in a site at Palo Prado in the Santa Cruz, and also over in a Mimbres site. And those also look like they were made by the same person who made the shell that wound up in this particular cache. So that was traded far and wide. They were going everywhere with the shell. Um, Shell was probably one of the most important artifacts or ornaments that the Hohokam had. They I would suspect that anybody that we recognize as part of the Hohokam culture, that archaeological defined culture, had a piece of shell of some kind, a bracelet, a pendant. They had some sort of piece of shell. It was that important. And the symbols that they used, we have snakes. Uh, this I think was representing a woodpecker of some kind. I call it rocket bird, but um, it comes from a site in Tucson, as does this. And then toads were very important again because of the significance of water and rain in the summertime. And then we get back to these wading birds, like the ones that I showed you in the second slide that I had with the Membrace bird. These wading birds show up in virtually every site, every pre-classic Hohokam site. Uh, that's a village of any size at all. These will show, one or two of these will show up, and they're probably things that were tied. You could use them as a pendant and put them on your clothing, or like this little bird that's here. You can put that on your clothing too. A little lizard here, but they were probably little tokens that every Hohokam had one of these, and you could use them. You could think of them probably as little fetishes. Like this guy might have been a little fetish that you would just carry around in a string bag or a pocket or something like that. The other thing that was interesting to Vic and I when we were working on this project is trying to figure out what figurines are all about. Figurines are, I think, to anybody that studies them, no matter where they are, they're kind of enigmatic because you don't really know what they are used for, and they probably had, again, multiple uses. They could represent people, they could represent particular kinship groups of some kind. They could represent, if you're studying, a male and female duality sort of system, um, any number of things, and they could represent deities as well. I think the best case we have in this particular uh, slide for deity is this little guy over here. This was found over on the San Pedro River, and you can see he's got ear bobs. He's got these coffee bean eyes. He's got nice little eyebrows. He's got a little thing on his head that when we first looked at it, we thought that was representing something like bighorn horns or something like that. But I think it's just a modified head wrapping of some kind. But the way that this one is designed, if you threw this into a collection of figurines from Nayarit or Sinaloa, you'd lose it in that collection because it just has that air of Mesoamericanness about it that the others uh, may or may not have. I like these little kind of turban like things. This figurine's about 10 centimeters high, has a blanket on one shoulder, and then wrapped around it, and he's wearing, looks like moccasins to me. But this was found near Sacaton. Um, we have these that I think are showing tattoos from a site south of Tucson. These are from sites in Tucson, and you can see these drawings down the face here. Uh, these I think are representing, maybe individuals that the person recognized and was making an image of. This one, don't know for sure. But it's interesting to me that you get these headbands as one style. That's one particular style, and you can see the headbands here. And then you have this other style of these sort of almost turban looking things, but they're head wrappings. And one of the things that this could be like leaves or something coming out as branches. And you can see how he's got, it looks like a braid that's tucked back up into his hairdo here. And this is was a really common way of doing your hair if you were a male a male Adam, back in the early 1900s, late 1800s to early 1900s, is you had a head wrap, you had waist length hair, and you would wrap it up into a head wrap like this. And I think that's what these particular things might be representing. And it may be a way to actually start defining male from female figurines for people that are studying Hohokam art. Don't know. It's really hard to say what these actually mean in most instances. Vic and I have got a book. We just finished the copy editing of it, so it's going to be out early next year. This is what it's going to look like. called The Hohokam and Their World, an Exploration of Art and Iconography. And it'll be out by the University of Arizona Press. And we hope that they can keep the price down. We're trying to find, and if you have any ideas about this, we're trying to find some subvention money so that we can put in as many color photographs as we can. We actually did have to do a lot of drawings of things because they are sensitive objects. A lot of the objects that we have in this book are sensitive, so we don't want to have color photos of them, but we do have a fair number of color photos that we were able to use. So if you have, thanks to all these people, and if you have questions, we can start taking questions, I guess. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Linda. You have some amazing examples, so that was really awesome.
Yeah,
We
that's a very broad brush example of stuff.
yeah. We do have quite a few questions, so I think I'll just
Okay.
get right to it.
Okay.
Let's see. I've read that this is about the negative images. I've read that negative images were never used for people. Do you have any thoughts about that and why?
I don't think I've ever seen a negative image of a human. So I don't know. That's a really good question as to why they wouldn't do that. They certainly do it in rock art. And I need to get out of the habit of saying rock art, rock imagery and petroglyphs and things like that, because when you're making a petroglyph, you are making a lighter colored image, so you're making a negative image in on that rock. But I don't know. If anybody has examples of negative images of people, I'd like to see them.
Okay, let's see what else. So this was someone's talking about the lower left horned lizard. So that was in your picture of the horned lizards, I guess. What's the wear in the bowl? Why is the bowl
Oh,
worn like that?
so that was the let's see if I can do this without
You
destroying things again.
yeah, you could pull it up
Yeah,
again.
I can pull it up and we could go there, share that. And I have to go backwards now. Go forwards and go backwards. Whoops. Stop the screen sharing. So start it again. Try this again. Fun with computers. So this is what you were talking about. Let's see if I can find him. There. So you're talking about this bowl right here. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. So talking about this bowl here, and you can see that circular, it almost looks like grinding in the middle. I guess I was kind of interpreting that as actually just a manufacturing artifact, because that's again really hard rock that they're using in there. I don't know that this has been studied in any way. This was in the ASM small artifact collection, and sometimes this material that's in that collection has like unknown proveniences or kind of we're not even always they're not even always sure what site they came from. So I don't know. I guess would be the answer on that. But I was interpreting it as a manufacturing kind of defect or effect.
Okay. You were just talking about the provenience a little bit, and there is a question in the chat. Do you have more specific provenience information for the anthro stone effigies that you showed, the stone effigy that you showed early on?
Stone.
I think
This guy.
Maybe.
Yeah, this actually comes from a site called the Barley site in Oracle. And it was collected by an avocationalist by not by Alice Carpenter, but by one of the people that she used to go out and dig with back in the 1940s, 1950s.
Okay. All right. How about were the horned snakes on ceramics or rock imagery?
Horned snakes.
Well, that's what it says.
These are the snakes that I showed. We don't have very many examples of horned snakes or plumed snakes in Hohokam art, which is really different from what you see in uh, you move over into the Mimbres or you move up north into the ancestral Puebloans, and they are doing those plumed serpents and so on. There is one image that I don't have an image of here, that is from a site in again near Gila Bend, that has what has been called a plume on it, but to me it actually looks like a headdress. So it looks like more like one of those head wrappings than it does like an actual um, horn or something. And I'm wondering if some of the images of horned serpents that we see, especially in the Pueblo area, where they'll have like little antlered heads and things like that. Maybe they're actually headdresses on the snake instead of, so they're personifying that snake in a way that they didn't do in Mesoamerica when they're associating it with Quetzalcoatl. But yeah, we don't have a lot of images of horned snakes. I know there are some in the South Mountains as well, in the South Mountain petroglyphs.
Okay, a couple of other questions here. Are there flute players in this rock art?
Yes, there are flute players in rock art as well as on pottery. Let me see if pull these images. I think all of the ones that we're illustrating here, all of these flute players are found on pottery. But there are flute players occasionally that you see on rock art, not in the same numbers that you see up north, but in this area, uh, they do they do exist, but they're not real common. One thing that I just thought of that might be interesting is if you see this image, this Hohokam bird, this shows up on pottery quite a bit in different areas. It also shows up in rock imagery, so in petroglyphs. And I was talking to Aaron Wright about this, who suggested that if we always, we kind of, as archaeologists, we often make the assumption that it was men who were doing the rock imagery. And he said that if you see these in the South Mountains, they're actually fairly common in the South Mountains. And I've seen some on like there's one at Picture Rocks and a couple other places. They look identical to the ones that you see on pottery. And if we assume that the people making the pottery are women, does that mean that the women are also making rock art, or does it mean that some men are actually making pottery? So we can play with gender aspects there. We'll never know the real answer, but we can play with it.
All right, I'm going to stay with some specific symbolism here. So here's another one. I've heard that the burden basket figures might be related to the story of Ho'ak. The baskets are filled with the children she's kidnapped and she's
Oh.
taking them to her care. Any comment?
Someone told me that story recently, and I don't know if that would be true or not. It'd be an interesting story for sure. But one of the things, if people have a chance to look at Howery's Hohokam book on Hohokam desert farmers and craftsmen, or desert craftsmen and farmers, from 1975 or 76, he's got some illustrations of people, burden basket carriers, that show examples that, for instance, look really similar to this type of basket. And then also they have the hooked cane. And I know that I have heard that the hooked cane is something, because one of the things that I've heard, and I don't know how to track that one down either, is that the hooked cane is associated with staves of authority, but also old age. But yeah, I have not heard that story. Be interesting to try and track that down, see where it would come from.
Thank you. Is there a time period associated with the horned lizard images?
The horned lizard images tend to be earlier rather than later. So you start seeing them probably in the 600s up through the 900s. not as common after that, although, let's see, where did I put that image? This particular pot, I think, dates to either the 9 or 1000s. Maybe 900s is a better date for that, just because it's kind of wild and crazy. But yeah, they do tend to be a little bit earlier in time than later in time. Why that would be, I don't know. The Adam, you see that in Adam culture, they have wooden fetishes that that the medicine people use to cure sicknesses of certain types that are shaped like horned lizards. And I don't know that we see it all that much in basketry and things like that. But yeah, so earlier rather than later. And conversely, toads, so these little toad images of shell, like this little guy, tend to be later in time. And they come right, they'll go right up through the 1400s, and the ancestral Puebloans, of course, are doing a lot of things like with inlay with turquoise and things like that with them that the Hohokam tend not to do. But the toads themselves tend to be later. Lizards are the earliest animal images that we know about are lizards and snakes. And then the other animals kind of fit into that.
I think this question is related to the same horned toad, the horned lizard, sorry, that is the bowl maybe. It says, is there basalt down south occurring naturally, or is it imported from the north?
I'm not sure what this material is. It's not basalt.
Okay.
It's a denser material than that. Or if it is, it's not vesicular, but I should say it's not vesicular basalt. I don't know on this one, on where the source is on it.
Okay. Let's see, a couple of thank yous for a good presentation. Can you elaborate more on the Hohokam and flower world?
Yeah, Flower World is a construct that was developed by Jane Hill and Kelly Hayes Gilpin. Jane Hill is a linguist and Kelly's an archaeologist. And they based it on terminology that's used in ancestral or in modern Puebloan societies, Hopi Zuni, or Hopi rather, in Uto-Aztecan speakers in particular. So Jane was studying the ancestry of Uto-Aztecan speakers, and when she's trying to figure out when, for instance, certain people came into the Southwest, how they or brought agriculture into the Southwest, and so on. And that Mesoamerican idea, the Aztecs have, I think they borrowed this from the Aztec idea of a flowery world where in the afterlife is full of shimmery things, shiny things. Iridescence is a real important factor, and I think it really is for the Hohokam as well. But iridescence, flowers, butterflies, it's associated with rebirth and fertility, that kind of thing, butterflies, birds. And for the Hohokam, I think that shows up as, of course, the iridescence. There's one, Dave Doyle a while ago wrote a paper that he called Rainbow World, and I think Rainbow World might fit even better than Flowery World, for Flower World for the Hohokam. But the iridescence idea, they're doing a lot of imagery with birds. They probably did a lot of things with feathers, and feathers with iridescence. Feathers don't keep very well, but we do find feathers in association with sites every once in a while. And trying to think of some of the other aspects of that. Nothing's coming to mind right now, but I think it if it's not like involved in that full capacity of Flower World, it's certainly getting the influences from West Mexico and Mesoamerica in that direction.
All right. Are there other questions out there? I think we've gotten through the list that we have. We have a few more minutes if anyone else has a question they'd like to ask. We can wait a minute otherwise. And if you have it while I'm talking, go ahead and put one in and I'll make sure to pick it up. But I want to really thank Linda more than normal for trying to do this twice, doing it well this time. And we appreciate the technology worked for us today.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
we had our fun with technology right before we started too.
we did.
Like it's cursed.
You're getting lots of clapping hands going up through the screen. Don't know if you
Yes,
can see
yeah,
those, and
yeah, I can
thumbs
see
up.
those. Yeah.
And let's see, there might be something here. Some thank yous. Please tell us the name of your upcoming book again.
Okay, it is called, hold on, The Hohokam in Their World, an exploration of art and iconography. So it's not a really flashy title, but I really like what they did with the this is the image that's going to go in there, and I like what they did with that, with the spirals in the background there.
I love the photo. That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I guess it's a BLM photo that was pulled off of Flickr.
Yeah.
But
It's
so
great.
I've been trying to figure out where it is. It's somewhere west of here, but I don't know for sure.
Mhm. Let's see, there is a few more thank yous and I'll send those to you later. Are you familiar with the rock imagery of Sutherland Canyon near Catalina State Park, and any thoughts about that imagery?
I have actually never been up to Sutherland Wash, but I've seen some of the images that are up there from there. We actually used some of them in our book. We used a couple of the things that are probably childbirth scenes in there. And what I think is interesting with that particular rock art is what it's made on, because it's not something that stands out. You have to really kind of know what's there before you can see it. But I actually have never been up there to visit that particular site. I've just seen pictures of it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. And thank you all of you for being on tonight. We appreciate your support. Wait, there might be another question here. Let me see. Oh, can't wait to read the book. Thank you so much. That's a nice comment to end with. We
Yeah.
appreciate that you're all here with us this evening. And Linda, any other thoughts before we close this up?
Nothing other than to just thank you, Fran, for all your work that you're doing with this and for substituting in on this and solving our technical problems.
Sure, sure. You're
Okay,
welcome. And everyone else out there, have a good evening. Hope to see you in July for Kellum Throgmorton's talk on Chacoan communities in New Mexico. So have a good evening and we will see you in July.